Welcome to the podcast that's dedicated to making you a faster cyclist, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. I'm Coach Jonathan Lee. We have the whole gang back together this week. We have TrainerRoad and Cannondale's Amber Pierce.
Hey, everybody.
Our head coach, Chad Timmerman.
Hi, everyone.
And our CEO, Nate Pearson.
Hello.
We're going to answer more of the cycling and triathlon related questions that you submitted at trainerroad.com/podcast. Thanks for doing that every week. We just seriously appreciate it. We got a ton of questions this week, filtered through a lot of them, built up a unique list, and I'm excited to get through with it this week and answer some stuff. If you're joining us live on YouTube right now, give us a thumbs up, and then you can also join in on the chat. There's tons of folks that'll be joining in, chatting about the questions we're talking about, and you can ask other ones, and we'll try to address some of those at the end of the episode.
John, what if people didn't send any questions? What would you do?
I mean, I'd probably just have a good talk with them. I'd sit down and ask them, what can I do to help? Because I'm sure there's lots of questions, but there's no punishment, nothing like that.
Yeah, but you could just imagine if we had to do the content on this without the asking of the question, like it would be so hard. And
it'd be extremely hard.
So we appreciate all the questions. And John, you read every single one of those, don't you?
Yeah, it's hundreds a week, many times. So, and got it. And if we have an echo on the audio, by the way, we have our producer working on it live, so we apologize for that. Sorry.
I need to apologize for the laxative story. That is a sign of disordered eating, and I did not know that, and I feel super bad for even bringing it up. So never ever do that. And if you know someone doing that to lose weight consistently, that's probably they need might need some help on some stuff. So that's something I learned, and I will make more mistakes, and I'm going to pre-apologize, but please, you can message me on, you can email me, nate@trainerroad.com, or you can message me on Instagram if you ever see me do something like that again, and I totally apologize.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we all make mistakes going through this. Imagine
some more than others.
Yeah. Imagine if all of us were on air all the time, right? It's a tricky thing, but we try to do our best, and we definitely recognize where we've messed up, and we try to do better.
And the sound is awesome now.
Yes. Awesome. Good. Thank you very much, producer Aaron in the background. So one thing I want to mention here is the Successful Athletes podcast. Last week, we had an interview with Will Stinger. So this is our other podcast, and you totally should listen to it. There will be a link down in the description below for you to find it. You can go to trainerroad.com/podcast and find a link to have a whole page dedicated to it, and some cool stuff with that too, that you can submit an area within that to be a part of that podcast, to be a guest on the podcast. If TrainerRoad's ever helped you succeed in any way, just type in your story and let us know. It's pretty awesome. But it was dead last to podium with at Lotoja with Will Stinger. And Lotoja, a lot of people know about that here in the States, but not elsewhere. It's the longest one-day USAC road race in the States. So it's 204 miles, I think, roughly. And it goes from Logan, Utah to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And within that, or with this race, it's really cool to talk to Will about this and tune into that episode, because he's done it multiple times. And he talks about going back to do it again, and improving all along the way. But I think we should do this race someday. Mm-hmm. It'd be a total blast. The first half is so it's like 10,000. Chad's face, sorry if you're not joining on YouTube. Chad just basically looked like I started speaking Spanish, like he's just not.
It's a prep for your Flanders-Roubaix 2 weeks.
Go ahead and explain fun. I'm eagerly awaiting.
Chad, to be clear, you've trained plenty of athletes that have done this before, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So you're keenly familiar with the race, at least from that perspective, from a coaching perspective.
Yeah, with the requirements of it, how long it takes to get through it, the havoc it wreaks on their bodies, how long it takes for them to come back from it. Yeah.
So 204 miles, about 10,000 feet of climbing. The majority of that climbing, basically all of it come in the first 100 miles. And then the second 100, it's kind of like a gradual down, but looking at the profile, it looks like gradual down, so it probably doesn't feel like down, and then a gradual up for the final, 50 miles or so. But it usually ends up finishing in a sprint finish. So it's not like the climbs aren't decisive enough to just remove it so that it's just a pure climbers race or anything like that. A big rider that's probably not fit is going to get shelled from the front end of the race just because of the climbs early on. But an all around sort of rider, it could be really fun to put a team together for that.
Do they have a Cat 2 only field?
Yeah. So actually, that's a good question. I think it's P1 too. They don't usually get a lot of pros or any pros that show up for some reason. It's but it is USAC sanctioned. So there's 5-4,
For some reason.
4-3 or something like
That's
that.
what I was
And then-
thinking.
yeah. Strange, huh? But I think it'd be a ton of fun. Are you up for it, Nate?
Oh yeah, I'll do it. If I'm 40, they talked about changing the USAC age groups, right, to be like 35 plus, 45 plus, to be 30 plus and 40 plus. I don't know if that happened, but if there was a 40 plus age group, that would be pretty awesome. If there was a Cat 2 40 plus, that would be really awesome.
Yeah.
I want to see Amber. Can you just show up and throw down at something like that, or like what would you do? How much training would you need?
You would need to train for something like that for sure. I mean, it would depend on your expectations. If you wanted to show up and do well, you would need to train.
We want you to win, Amber. I think everyone listening wants you to win.
Yeah. How sweet would that
For
be?
sure.
Oh man.
Are you good at sprinting like many hours in? Like when everyone else is fatigued, you're good at sprinting?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It is a strength.
I'm good at that
imagine-
too.
We're going to talk a lot about this later on, but I imagine that's kind of what happens when you're the athlete you are, but you're being a domestique, right, Amber? Because you're used to doing those long hours, but also you have to be able to, whether it's pull somebody up to a group or do those sort of tasks. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. This might be one of those cases where just because you can doesn't mean you should or want to.
Ooh, I know what we should do. We should have the users vote. Do we want to see Amber and Chad do this race? Because
I wonder how that'll end up.
yeah, I'll put it on Instagram, tr.nate. I'll do it right this second. Talk about something. I'll do it in one of the deep dives. But that would be, because John and I will just do it, right, John? Like,
Yeah, I think
this is a pretty good race for you, too.
Yeah, I think it could be. Yeah, really do. It favors a good fueler, so to speak. And what I mean by that is a person that can eat really well. And that's Nate's strength for sure. And it's one of my strengths now too. So that would be, I feel like, one of the biggest details with that race. And there's also Cameron Hoffman, friend of the podcast, used to be a pro cyclist, extremely, multi-time national champion, very, very good road racer. He's won that race multiple times. And so if we do end up doing that, I want to get Cameron on the podcast, and then we can talk about that because he's got a lot of insight and such a savvy racer too.
Amber, I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. So in the pro women's field, we've talked about it a bunch, but they eat, right?
Oh, yeah.
During races and stuff.
Absolutely.
When you raced like USAC, Cat 1, Cat 2, did those women eat as much as the pro women?
I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions is forgetting to eat enough and what it means to eat enough. So the more experienced racers for sure are really, really good eaters, like really, really good at fueling themselves. But to race at the Cat 2, Cat 1 level in the States is still very competitive. So I don't think there's as much of a difference there between the Cat 1, Cat 2 versus the pro ranks. But yeah, there is very much of a difference. But the best racers in the world are really, really good at fueling themselves.
What I was thinking on this, John, is that so Lotoja is so long that if Amber comes with her world tour level eating, if that gets you, she could be eating an extra 800,000 calories during that whole race compared to other women.
800,000 calories?
800 to 1,000 calories more. Could it be even more? Right?
Amber,
and if the last
prepare yourself.
if the last half is like flat downhill, which is like Amber's jam, and Amber is bigger than most women in cycling, that's even a bigger performance. Like if there's a crosswind, you just solo. Like it'd be awesome. I want to see. I'm gonna be in a chase car.
I really want to add that to my resume, world tour level eater.
Seriously, that's like that's a necessity. If you can't do that, you just can't hang, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We'll do all you can eat sushi eating contest when you come to Reno. We do this at the company.
Yeah, that'll be fun. So it's an awesome podcast with Will. I would totally check it out. He actually came back from one of the most horrifying accidents I've ever heard of. And Will said in his words, he was like, I learned my lesson to not ride in the dark and early mornings. And instead, I just ride the trainer early mornings. But he was riding in the dark and took a different route than he normally does because they were doing a marathon in that region. He went over a cattle guard and his front wheel dropped in between the cattle guard grates and his face hit his front wheel and it split his lip open and his gums, and he lost teeth, and it cut his lip or his tongue, and like it was horrendous. And he ended up coming back from that, and it took a long time because of the blood loss actually was the main thing. It took a long time for him to get back to where he could actually train again. And then he came back from that and had his best performance ever at Lotoja. Was super diligent in his training all year leading up to it this year. And just a really cool insight into what, I would say that Will does far above average things, but in many respects, he's an average person. So it's a really cool podcast.
That brings up like a bone to pick. When like there's cattle guards that go across, and John is exactly right. So there's strips one way, and then there's strips another way. But sometimes the strips that are supposed to keep your wheel from going in will be gone on just some slats, right?
Yes.
And they don't care. Like for cows and for cars, it doesn't matter. And if you're in a pace line or a peloton, how many times do you see someone you're jamming down, they don't call it out, and the first person like bunny hops it, and then everyone else gets surprised and goes, "Oh my goodness, there's a cattle guard here." Just you're not racing probably. Just slow it down, point it out, get over it safely. The other one is drainage. We have these in Verdi, like the little drainage things where the same thing can happen where your wheel can get stuck.
Yeah.
I've seen people too, like they're only, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet wide. You can avoid them. I saw Scott Waters, I think Pete was actually on his wheel, and he was going 45 miles per hour. He decided to go over it rather than around it. I think he double flatted with someone right behind him. Very, very scary. I was off to the side because I didn't want to do that. But in general, if you're leading, slow down for those things or just avoid them completely.
Go around them.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't. If you're the first person, you have to bunny hop something. Like something is seriously messed up. You did a bad job leading the group. Don't do that.
It's one thing if like a bottle drops right in front of you in 1 second and that's the only choice. But if you saw something coming on the road, it's definitely best to point it out, go around, right, Chad?
You're responsible for the safety of the riders who are following you and trusting you to do the right things.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a sketchy thing. And also with cattle guards, I see a lot of riders try to ride the parallel bars, not the horizontal ones, but every once in a while they'll have like a parallel small bar that'll go across it. And I think it's actually a structural thing to try to hold it in place. And that is so much worse than just going over the horizontal perpendicular bars. Because if you ride that thing, but then your front tire just slips off the edge a little bit, that's all it takes for you to crash. So it's better to not try to ride skinnies across a cattle guard. And if you did it, the person behind you certainly isn't going to be able to do it. It's just roll through them. So I wish cattle guards didn't exist. But anyways, Successful Athletes Podcast, check it out. Head over to TrainerRoad.com. That's how you get faster. And that's the moral of the story from all those Successful Athletes podcasts. If you look at that, it's like FTP increase, watt kg increase, win. Like, it's just bam, 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 bam. All these people using TrainerRoad to do it. It works. So, and the last thing I'm going to mention here on the forum, if you're listening to this, you should totally join the forum because your people are already there. It's an awesome community. It's fantastic. And I just saw something that made my heart warm this morning on there. There's actually a thread called the official Pay It Forward equipment thread where people are finding stuff where they have, and they just want to give it to somebody that needs it. And I thought that was super cool. And I know that I have a lot of gear that I just need to pay forward instead of try to like sell or anything like that. So I'm going to put stuff on there too. So if you're in need, that's a great spot of some sort of equipment or anything like that. If you have extra stuff, it makes you feel really good helping somebody else maybe get what they need to be able to just ride their bike, especially right now, because sometimes you can't even find bike parts because everything's back ordered. So check that out and check out the forum. Okay, Chris's question. He says, first he says, "Hi, TrainerRoad crew, and thanks in advance if you answer this question." We're going to answer it, Chris. He says, "Across different blog posts and podcasts, you've shared a wealth of knowledge about nutrition and nutrient timing in relation to training. I'm wondering if you could put it all together into a perfect day for eating performance. Now, I know that we're not robots, etc., but it would be nice to have a guide of what to aim for. For example, when relative to my workout, should I consume antioxidants? If I'm an evening workouter, should I have a protein-rich breakfast and transition to more carb-focused foods in the afternoon? Where do things like beet juice, tart cherry juice, and collagen come into the mix? Thank you." The answer for tart cherry juice is all the time. But because it's delicious. But going away from that and into this, we thought this was a great opportunity to kind of run through run through once again the ideal day of nutrition, but also point out some flexibility within that, right, Amber? Because it's not, if only we were robots and we could eat the same every day.
Right, right. There's no secret formula. Let's just start there. And again, to Jonathan's point, being flexible is really key. So you want to apply some pretty general principles. So I'm going to start by covering some basic principles that I think are generally applicable, and then go into a few examples of how you would actually apply those principles into an actual day where you're training. So these would be normal training days. We're not going to look at like a race day situation. And the perspective that I'm coming at this from is my belief, and this is me, is that really you want to get the most out of your training. So to get the most out of your training, you want to fuel your training and give your body what it needs to accomplish the highest quality work. So the better quality work you can do in a training session, the better the training stress is going to be, the better your adaptations will be. And that's really what we're after, right? Is you want to stress the system appropriately to get the adaptations that you want. And the higher the quality of stress, the higher the quality of those adaptations will be. And not only that, but the nutrition, post-workout is going to have something to do with how well you're adapting. So I really like the idea of fueling each workout so that you can get the most out of each workout. So it's really about getting the highest quality performance out of yourself on the day. So I'm really going to focus on fueling strategy. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on supplements in particular. I will say probably for tart cherry juice, maybe in the evening, like before bed might be a good time for that. But just focusing mostly on the performance, we'll go through some stuff. Yeah, Jonathan.
On the tart cherry juice thing, it's like Chad and I have talked before about our sweet tooth killers, so to speak, like the little things that we'll do in the evenings when, we're trying to be conscious of what we're putting into our bodies and fueling our training, but then not being excessive. And one of the things that I really like to do with that sweet tooth killer, so to speak, in the evenings, if you really just feel like that ice cream or dessert, is a little bit of tart cherry juice. I've mentioned this before, mix it in with some sparkling water or something like that and a dash of lime. And it's something that's just sweet enough to kind of satisfy that, but it's really not a lot of sugar when you're just using a small amount of it, because a little bit of tart cherry juice goes a long way. So it's a great way.
I can't remember the exact details, but it's tied to melatonin release too. So doing it in the evening can actually benefit the release of melatonin and therefore sleep, a little bit of sleep benefit.
Yeah. So looking at this from a performance perspective, and yes, we are going to talk about carbohydrate. Shocking. But the reason for that, and you guys have heard us say this many, many times before, but the reason is it works. And it is really the key to getting the most out of a workout and really getting the highest quality work in a session. So with that, let's look at some principles. The first and overarching principle with all of this is your number one goal is to nourish yourself. And nourishing has a lot to do with nutrients, fuel, but it's also energetic. It's also mood. And this is about mind and body, right? It's not just a physical thing. And to that point, I think it's important to remember that your body is always trying to help. So fueling yourself well is about helping your body help you. Second point is don't diet on the bike. It might seem tempting because it's easy to, you don't have food accessible to you if you don't put stuff in your pockets, but this is not the time to cut calories. This is the time to really fuel the work that you're doing. So fuel your effort with what you eat before, during, and immediately after your ride. And we'll get into that a little bit more. And Jonathan has a quick comment here on that one.
Yeah. Like I was just going to say, like I was thinking about this over last weekend, and we're so proud of starving ourselves all the time and doing some sort of performance thing. And we have this weird obsession with doing that. I don't know why. And when I say we, I mean, seems like humans in general. They're like, he did that with no food. And we're all very impressed. But we should be proud of our fueling, like be proud of we're all proud of the fact that we really hit our marks on our intervals. We should be really proud of the fact that we hit our marks with our nutrition. It should be another thing that goes along with that. And it's not easy. Chad's been riding for years, and it's still something that you struggle with, Chad. Like it's nothing that you're going to be perfect at once you start at. But if you try it and you institute some sort of intentional framework for nutrition into your training, be proud when you make steps toward making it better. That should be another strong source of pride for you as an athlete, because it leads toward health and better performance.
The thing that we'll get that message that says, well, I did an 80-mile ride on just water. I'm like, that's, if that is the outcome that you're shooting for, that's one thing. But in this podcast, the outcome is performance. How can we get faster with TrainerRoad? And those are two different things, right? So if you just listen to Amber more, I'm not even
Well, this is a good point. Nutrition is a really good process goal. You know, learning how to fuel yourself better, fuel yourself well is a really good process goal because it's something that is within your control and that you can really work on intentionally. So the third principle I want to talk about is that that fueling, it does need to be mostly carbohydrate. And I'll get into that a little bit more, but before and during is almost exclusively carbohydrate. That's what your body's going to be using for fuel. And then immediately after in that golden window is where you really want to get some carbohydrate and protein. I'll get into the numbers on that. One of the principles I use as a rule of thumb, and again, this is not something you have to do right away, but it's a good process goal, is I kind of add up the calories from carbohydrate before and during the ride. And I aim for those to equal about what I'm going to burn on the ride. And then I'll have a recovery shake separate from that. So I don't use the recovery shake necessarily in trying to cover what I'm burning. It's the before and during that should cover what you're burning. And then the recovery shake is an extra on top of that. And then the recovery shake, I like to go for that 4-to-1 carbohydrate to protein ratio. And that ratio is measured in grams. And then each gram of carbohydrate is 4 kilocalories, and versus protein, I think don't quote me on that. I have the math later on. It's a little bit early. I need a little more caffeine. Then the other one is you want to hydrate. So you want to be hydrating off the bike and on the bike. And when you're on the bike, you want to make sure that you're also replacing electrolytes in addition to taking on water. And then the other meals throughout the day, this is where you really want to emphasize nutrient density, but not at the cost of enjoyment. So part of fueling and nourishing yourself is enjoying your meals, enjoying the food that you're taking in. And I think that it's important that instead of applying labels of good or bad, I think it's good to think of food in terms of options. And by the way, how awesome is it that we have options that we can choose from, and that each option of fueling and nourishment that we have confers certain benefits. And some options confer a lot of benefit, like nutrients, satiety, enjoyment, comfort, connection, great taste, sustained energy, elevated mood. That's awesome. And then some things maybe don't confer as much benefit. Maybe it tastes good and there's a brief energy bump and brief enjoyment. It's not bad. It's just not as the benefits aren't as numerous as with other foods. So I think it's really important to think about foods in terms of what benefits they're going to confer and how different foods make you feel, because we're all individual, and some foods are going to be really, really, they're just going to work with our body, and you're going to get tons of energy and good mood elevation, and others not so much. Yeah, Jonathan.
Like Popeyes.
Yeah. Even like a good way of doing this too is, even if you think like, so a good example of this, if I have Scratch recovery mix and it has lactase added into it, so I have lactose, I'm lactose intolerant, right? And Scratch has lactase added in. I try that, it just messes with my stomach every time. Even with that, even if I take lactase as well, like Lactaid pills, I take that in. But if I have Cliff Nutrition and I bring my own Lactaid, it's so much better. So there's a temptation too to sometimes just like say, well, recovery drinks just simply don't work for me, and kind of throw them out. But maybe it's just trying a different version of the same thing, so to speak. It's one's Scratch chocolate, one is Cliff chocolate, and the Cliff chocolate just happens to work better on my stomach. So to your point, Amber, a lot of the time you'll say, well, this just doesn't work out for me. Well, maybe try a different version of the same thing. And that can even go with like produce, right? Like if you're getting kale from a specific store, maybe try it from a different store. It's not as bad as you think. Plenty of different options like that.
I have a pro tip to make your own recovery drink a lot cheaper. Sorry to interject in here, Amber, but
go for it.
Listen. So, John, I am also lactose intolerant. I think a good protein source, and this has been backed up with like not heavy metals and like the amount of protein that it says is in it, is the On Nutrition whey, and they have like the gold whey, but you just get the regular whey. Very cheap. You get a whole bunch of it. It tastes okay, and then you can buy maltodextrin and fructose on just online, like on Amazon, and it is super duper cheap. Like you'll be 25-pound bag for like $20 or something. And then you can just measure out whatever ratios you want in a 4-to-1 carb to protein mix. And then in your fructose to maltodextrin, do a 2-to-1 inside of there. So you got to do a teeny bit of math. But if you make that and you get the chocolate flavor, then you can add some electrolytes to it, depending on how much you want, which is basically you just add table salt. You're like there in a really cheap recovery drink that does not mess with your stomach.
I'm going to make Ritual chocolate recovery drink. Ritual chocolate. It's this like chocolate that Chad and I obsess over, and it's incredibly good. Also made by a cyclist, Robbie and Anna. They're big cyclists on the company, but I'm going to make Ritual chocolate recovery now, Chad.
Is it powdered? Do they have powdered chocolate?
Yeah, so you can get drinking chocolate.
Drinking
and it's
chocolate.
Powdered. Yeah, and oh my goodness, great! I want to make it right now. That sounds
so.
amazing.
Just what Amber said about nourishing yourself. Like I know that Ritual chocolate. Every time John eats it, he loves it, and I know this because he tells everyone about it. Like on Instagram, it's like his CrossFit. He loves Ritual chocolate more than anything on earth, and it is really good. But I see more posts about Ritual chocolate than his son. Just saying. So what you can do, like that's the thing though. He's adding something just to make it like look so forward to it. Have that his brain just say yes, and he doesn't go, and actually this chocolate's probably good for you too, right? The antioxidant content.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's eating dark. It's very dark chocolate too, I'm guessing, right? Like a high cacao.
It is.
Always.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyways,
Lots of
No
benefit.
preservatives.
Lots of benefit.
Like and you mentioned this plenty of time. Like you mentioned it there with just like enjoying your meals and everything else, Amber. Like if you can find food that is nutritious for you and then you actually enjoy it, that takes constant experimentation. It's not like you experiment for a period and find it, then you hold on to that food forever, but when you can find that, man, it just makes the whole process so much easier and life in general better. It turns eating, because I've fallen victim to this plenty of times as an athlete, where eating becomes kind of a necessity and a bit of a drag. You just feel like, I got to get food in, and it's like it becomes a monotonous process, but it's so much of our lives when you think about it, what we're putting into us and how often we do it. So it is so much better to do it with some enjoyment.
Yeah. And
really
you can
good tip.
experiment with, maybe broccoli a certain way. Steamed broccoli is just not your thing. I found that roasting broccoli with salt and olive oil, to me, it's so good. It tastes like candy. Like my husband and I joke, that's our shorthand for that term, is we roast broccoli and cauliflower together and we call it candy because it's so delicious to us. And I guarantee that things that you might think are just kind of gross because, it's too good for you. And, who can actually like the flavor of kale? There's a million ways of preparing food, and you might find a way that something that really elevates your energy, makes you feel really good. If you find a new way of preparing it that is actually more palatable and something that you really, really enjoy, it's a win-win. So, experimenting with how you're preparing your foods is another good way to approach this. And I just, tacking on a little bit to that good versus bad foods, guilt never needs to be a part of this equation. It really, really doesn't. And I know a lot of people are attached to this idea that your guilt is what keeps you in line, so to speak, air quotes. And that makes sense. I mean, it's totally understandable that a lot of us would feel like that, because chances are really good that at some point at a young age, you learn this lesson because somebody in a position of authority used guilt to make you feel terrible for stepping out of line for some reason. And so we learn that at a really young age as a tool for keeping us on track. And it's not necessary. It really isn't. When you start to become aware of how food affects you and how you're going to feel an hour after you've eaten, 2 hours after you've eaten, how much you're enjoying the food, how it's affecting your mood and your energy levels, all of those things, when you start to really focus in on that, from time to time, you're probably going to eat something that doesn't confer a lot of benefit and that maybe an hour later is going to leave you feeling pretty blah. But those are not the foods that you're going to gravitate to on a consistent basis. You'll find yourself gravitating more to the foods that are going to make you feel good in the bigger picture. So, I really strongly suggest that, you kind of re-examine that idea that guilt is a necessary tool for you. I strongly suspect it's not. And I just kind of wanted to pose a question to the group here. Like, when you guys eat well for nourishment, do you find that you gravitate towards foods that confer more benefit for you?
Oh, totally.
100%.
Completely.
For me too, it's the quantity where I will feel guilty for eating too much quantity. And then because I'm like, I should lose a couple, I want the scale to go down. And then every single time every single time. Like within 10 days, my training falls off like a cliff, right? And I'm thinking, if I do lose some weight, my FTP goes down, my power weight stays the same. It's this nasty like cycle that I have. And then if my FTP goes up, it's always because I'm eating lots of high quality food, and a lot of it too, because it's, we're burning a lot. And yeah, that's all I have to say about that. I'm really bad at segues today. Yeah, Chad, segue.
My junior high school teacher framed it for me way back when he told us that guilt doesn't keep you from doing anything. It only keeps you from enjoying it. So it's really a useless emotion. So there's just not a lot of point in denying yourself something you're going to do anyway, if all you're really doing is depriving yourself of the enjoyment that goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've carried that with me. It was one of those lessons that stuck. It was just this pithy little comment that he sprinkled in during a lecture, probably didn't think twice about it. And it's stuck with me since then.
That's awesome. It's so true. It's so true. And
we're really good at amnesia with guilt, right? In the sense that like if one thing caused us guilt and we feel like, oh man, I'm never going to do that again, we're certain to do that again. Like, like we just go back and do it. So that is like a really useless thing. The big thing that I find too is if I'm eating for more nourishment, everything else becomes easier. So like I view my life, so to speak, or my performance in life as all the different stress adds up to a certain point. And if I have life stress that's adding up there, it means that I have to have less training stress. But if my life stress goes down, then I can add more training stress. And really the end goal is to be a healthy individual. The end goal isn't to just have 100% training stress and just forget about everything else in life. But I've noticed that when I'm eating for nourishment, my life stress goes down, because usually what it means is that I spend more time with my family preparing food in the kitchen. It usually means that I spend more time thinking about these things and planning them out and then doing them in such a way where it's more organized. It usually means that my life it has a cascading effect through it where my life is more organized and there is less stress. So then that allows me to be able to get more out of my training. I don't necessarily add on more training stress in those moments, but the training stress that I'm dosing my body with, it seems like I absorb more of it and I become faster from it. So it's just, and I feel better overall. It's a hard choice many times because it isn't our first inclination, because our first inclination is just to grab whatever is close and then whatever satisfies at the mouth. And then we forget about anything after that. But boy, it pays off. And for us athletes that have high goals, it really, pushes us where we need to be. But, Nate, you mentioned quantity, and that's another thing. I think that moderation is key. And this is something where a lot of us too will find something that works. We mentioned this a few podcasts ago and we latch onto it and we just hold on to that thing and we'll just stick with that 100%. But Nate, when you're talking about eating a lot and doing that sort of stuff, it's a lot of variety. It's not just eating, a bunch of one specific thing, right, Amber? Like moderation has its place within this.
Yeah, I think variety is really key. And I think, going back to this idea of guilt and exactly what Chad said, it only makes it so you don't enjoy the thing that you're going to do. We all have favorite treats, like your ritual chocolate. And I think those things, they confer a wonderful benefit of immediate gratification. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, you guys. We call these things treats for a reason. They boost mood, they bring comfort. There's sometimes a ritual connected to them that's important. And if you're enjoying those things from time to time, it's the spice of life. Those are not necessarily things that we call them treats for a reason. Like they don't have to be things that you just never, ever do. You don't have to set up rigid rules. It's about applying general principles with some flexibility. And I think that, again, if you start really paying attention to like, okay, that was awesome immediate gratification, but 30 minutes later, I really didn't feel that great. That's not going to be the thing that you're going to reach for to eat for every meal. It's just bringing a level of awareness to how what you're taking in is really affecting you. Yeah. Nate, it looked like you had something you wanted to jump in and say.
I was going to say an inappropriate joke, and I don't know if I should say it or not. Just let it
Let's move it right along, Amber. Let's move this thing along.
Next week, then.
We'll save that for beers with Chad.
Yeah.
Beers with Nate. Yeah.
Beers with Nate.
Yeah. Ask me that next beers with Nate thing.
So my last principle that I want to say is just work your way up to better fueling. And we touched on this earlier. It's an awesome process goal. If you can't eat 300 calories an hour on the bike, that's totally understandable, especially if you're not somebody who's been used to fueling yourself, really liberally and well during your training. Start somewhere. So start with 100 calories an hour and get to a point where that feels doable from a behavioral standpoint, because this is building a new habit. So it's just that the behavioral part of this is remembering to eat, remembering to pack the food with you, actually eating on the bike at, good time intervals. And then there's also the physiological adaptation, which is just training your gut to be able to process this stuff. And so if you're hydrating well, get to a point where you're comfortable and you feel you built a good habit of eating 100 calories an hour, and then bump it up to 200 and then bump it up to 300. But it takes time. So be patient with yourself. But this is an awesome, awesome goal to set for yourself, because again, it's one of those that's fully within your control, and it will make your training feel so much better.
Yeah, 100%. Be a world tour eater, not just a peddler.
People, also with the solids versus liquids, I can do 500 an hour on just liquid. And I think that's also a superpower, because I've been training that way for a long time. But in a mountain bike race, something where you can't reach into your pockets, or you don't want to because it's like a little technical, being able just to drink it is extremely nice. The only issue with that is, if you're used to it, is if the temperature is low, it can be really hard then to get enough calories in and not drink so much that you have to pee all the time. Mm-hmm. In that situation, I wish I was better mountain biking, reached into a pocket, getting out a bar or something like that.
Right. And that's something else to train too, is figuring out what's going to work for your body. So if you're really good at eating up to 200 calories in solid foods, but that's kind of your max when it comes to solid food, can you add some more carbohydrate to your mix? And maybe you can get it, maybe you can get into your system through liquid form. So experimenting with that. And then also, to your point, like some races are more technical. You might have constraints as far as how much you can fit on your bike. All of those things are things to take into account. So coming up with little strategies for how you can fuel better depending on your constraints or your applications, it's all great stuff. So, oh yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to say, if I can recap the principles really quick, and then that probably is a good segue to go into the actual contextual application of a couple like days for this. So Amber's principles, which are awesome here. Once again, the goal is to nourish yourself, mind and body with this. Don't diet on the bike. Make sure that you're hydrating. And then also make sure that you are finding the proper motivators with this. Guilt doesn't need to be there. Once again, we're trying to nourish ourselves. So work on that relationship that you have, and don't expect it to change overnight, but it can get there. Utilize moderation in what you're having. That will make sure that you're experimenting, finding the right things, and then taking in a variety. And then also, once again, be patient with yourself and work your way up to it. With all those things in mind, Amber, let's run into some of the scenarios that you've laid out that are that'll hopefully illustrate the fact that your nutrition isn't going to be the same every day. It's going to change, right?
Yeah,
What's
absolutely.
the first one we want to start with?
Yeah, so I'm gonna cite 3 examples today. So the first 2 examples are maybe a typical weekday training schedule for somebody who works full time. So one of those would be like an early morning 1-hour session, and one of those might be a 2-hour session in the evening. And then the third example will be a really long 4-hour endurance ride, maybe on a weekend where you have a lot more flexibility in your schedule on the day. And again, I'm looking at this from performance standpoint. So I'm going to focus mostly on the fueling, not going to talk a ton about supplements. And we'll touch briefly on how we would apply some of those principles on off the bike. So in the first example, this is a weekday early morning workout, and we're going to assume this is 1 hour high intensity. For simple math sake, I'm going to assume that you're going to burn about 500 calories in that 1 hour workout. And we're also going to assume that since this is an early morning workout, you're not going to be able to get up 3 hours before your workout and eat. On an ideal race day, and we'll talk about this, in context of the weekend ride. In an ideal scenario, you'd want to probably finish your last like big meal pre-ride about 3 hours before you ride. And again, that's something to experiment with. Some people do fine with 2 hours before, but in a really early morning workout, that's just not in the cards. So you still want to make sure that you're fueling this ride. So here's what I would suggest. Again, I'm using the math of total calories burned on the ride, in this case, 500 calories. We want to make sure that what you eat before the ride and during the ride will add up to about 500 calories. And it doesn't have to be too precise. So in this case, early morning, as you're getting ready, maybe snack on low fiber toast and jam would be about 200 calories. And the reason I say low fiber It's not because fiber is bad for you. Obviously, fiber is really good for you. And in other applications, I would probably suggest like a nice whole grain, whole wheat bread. But in this case, you don't want that fiber gumming up your GI tract. You really want to absorb those carbohydrates quickly so that you can start using it as fuel on the bike, because you've just woken up and you're not going to have a lot of time to digest before you get on the bike. So a low fiber toast and jam, about 200 calories. Then during the ride, I'd suggest that you drink 2 full bottles, one with an electrolyte and carbohydrate mix. So that would be about 80 calories. The second bottle could just be plain water, so no calories. And then I would suggest, I'm going to use Cliff Blocks as a shorthand here, but
They're a
gels a lot.
universal unit of measurement, actually. Yeah.
They are. It's full on SI units here. No, but almost, I would say most of the commercialized fueling products on the market are pretty easy to come by in 100 calorie increments. So the one package of Cliff Blocks is about 200 calories. So each one has 6 blocks in it. So 3 blocks is about 100 calories. So in this case, I would start to have, just eat the Cliff Blocks maybe 1 at a time or 2 at a time at even intervals throughout your training session. And that'll give you about 200 calories. So pre-ride, toast and jam, 200 calories. During the ride, you have your mix and your Cliff Blocks totaling 280 calories. So that's about 480 calories. That's almost your 500. And if you wanted to put mix in the second bottle, you would meet that 500 goal. But that's pretty good. And then post ride, just a simple recovery mix solution. Nate had a great suggestion earlier. One of my favorites is just having a scoop of plain whey with 2 scoops of lemon lime Gatorade powder, just like original straight up Gatorade powder. Tastes like key lime pie. And that's about 230 calories. I'm speaking in kilocalories here, just for that's the standard unit of measurement in nutrition speak. And then that 1 scoop of whey, 2 scoops Gatorade powder gives you a roughly 4-to-1 protein to carbohydrate ratio. So it's a really good post recovery for signaling, and the math works out so that you're replacing what you burn. So you're really fueling the effort on the bike that morning. And then lunch and dinner. So lunch, I would say square meal, protein, carbohydrates, fats, foods that you enjoy and that make you feel nourished. Think about, like, what do you enjoy? What would you look forward to eating at lunch? How would that sit with you an hour later, 2 hours later? So picking foods that are really going to sit with you and sustain you through the afternoon, but that you're going to look forward to eating and that you're really going to enjoy. And then dinner on a day like that, same principles for lunch. But again, you want to zoom out and think about bigger context. So are you in the middle of a really, really intense block of training? If so, you're probably going to want to increase the amount of carbohydrate that you're taking in your off the bike meals. Protein is always key. You want to make sure that you're timing your dinner so that you get good sleep. Maybe you don't want to eat right before you go to bed, and figuring out how long before you go to bed is going to help you fall asleep and get good deep sleep. Those are all things to think about and experiment with. But it's really about, what's going to make you feel nourished, what's going to sit well when you're trying to fall asleep. These are not things that we can prescribe or suggest because they're highly, highly individual. That's kind of a general application of the principles on a weekday if you were working out really, really early in the morning.
Which is a super common scenario for the large amount of people listening to this. It's the more successful athletes podcasts I record, the more I realize that all of us have situations where we're limited on time, right? So it's a really common scenario, and one that I think all of us should take note on. One big thing that I noticed with that, Amber, is the fact that it's almost like you're zeroing out that workout with what you take on that. So then that way your nutrition for the rest of the day remains consistent with just a normal, healthy lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
We're really, I feel like a lot of the time we rob ourselves during the workout, and then afterward we continue to rob ourselves with our post-race nutrition there, or post-ride nutrition thereafter. So this is really cool to see. The workout nutrition takes care of itself, so then you can continue healthy, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the similar scenario in the second example, we're looking at, okay, again, weekday. So somebody's going to have most of the day is taken up with work, kids, school, whatever it happens to be. And then you're going to get in maybe a 2-hour evening workout with intervals. So again, to keep the math simple, I'm going to assume about 500 calories per hour are going to get burned during that workout. So the workout is going to burn about 1,000 calories in 2 hours. And in this case, because it's in the evening, there is a little bit more flexibility to try to eat 3 hours before that 2-hour workout. So for breakfast, just a square meal to fuel your day. Do you guys have any favorite breakfasts when you know you're going to be working out in the evening?
Mhm.
I do the same every day right now, which is overnight oats, and I've posted
Mhm.
them on Instagram. It's my wife puts in like spinach and greens and nuts and fruit on it, and chia seeds and stuff, and it's really good.
Yeah, I love
I
oatmeal.
usually I usually do brown rice with some egg, and then I throw in some peppers and then some greens within that. And that's like a really good savory breakfast that tends to hold me over for a good period of time. It's very satiating because that's whenever I eat like a more sugary breakfast, I find that I'm not as satiated. And if I
Mhm.
have something that like the eggs and such that bring more fat content, that sort of a thing, I feel pretty satiated all throughout. And then that way I also know that later on, if I'm going to train, I'm not going to be taking in a lot of fat too. So I don't feel like I'm taking in excessive fat or anything like that with that breakfast.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Chad, what's your go-to?
This is a tough one for me because I typically do my workouts super early morning. So if I have a big breakfast, one that makes me feel good and fuels me for the rest of the day and probably supplements my next workout, it's post workout. But
Mhm.
it's typically Kodiak cakes and with syrup, excuse me, and then just eggs, and we actually put ketchup on it. So scrambled eggs with ketchup. And I'm not a real big fan of putting sugar on my protein, but in this case, I'm
So
already
good.
dumping syrup on the pancakes, and it just all works. And man, I am ready to go for whatever comes next.
Oh, that's awesome.
And
Yeah, I really like eggs too.
I apologize for the froggy voices for all of us here in Reno. We're getting wrecked by allergies, I think, all three of us right now. So
Smoke or something, man.
yeah, we apologize for it. So Amber, yeah, going back to it, we have that breakfast. It's the square meal. What are the next
Mhm.
steps if we're going to work out in the evening?
Okay, so evening workout means that probably your lunch is going to be your pre-workout meal. So again, this is where we're starting to do the math on what are you going to burn during your workout, your pre-ride meal, and then what you eat during. We want that to equal what you're going to burn during your workout. So in this case, the workout's going to burn about 1,000 calories. So at lunch, you want to make sure that you're taking in about 400 calories worth of carbohydrate, and that would just look like about 4 ounces of pasta. So if you we're having a sandwich or maybe so stir fry with some veggies, whatever it happens to be. If you just add 4 ounces of pasta, maybe pasta becomes the main meal and you just do some olive oil, some protein, and some veggies mixed in. Great, but the point is you want to get that 400 calories of carbohydrate, and that's a good example of what would do it. And then you give yourself that 3 hours before your workout. So now we're looking at what you would eat during the ride. And for a ride like this, 2 hours, I would aim to drink 4 bottles, and I like to alternate mix and water. Personally, it's personal taste. But I would do 2 bottles of mix, so about 80 calories each. That's 120 calories. 2 bottles of water, no calories, but good hydration. And then I would probably have about 2 packages of Cliff Box, which is about 400 calories. So again, those packages are 6 blocks each. So something around like eating 3 blocks every 15 minutes or so. Or if you're doing intervals, just pop in a few blocks in your mouth between intervals. It's a really great way to continuously signal to your brain that you have fuel incoming, so you can just keep writing those checks and your brain's going to go, okay, cool, like we can handle these intervals as long as the fuel's coming on board. And so that's one of the principles too, is just making sure that you're eating consistently throughout the ride. um,
Mhm.
so that means pre-lunch, pre-ride lunch is 400 calories of carbohydrate, and then during the ride is 120 plus 400 is 520 calories. So you end up with about 920 calories, almost 1,000. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but this is a good, solid fueling strategy for a workout like this. And then post ride, standard recovery shake. Like this is actually what I would do is I just had the same recovery shake after every workout, which is that 1 scoop of whey and 2 scoops Gatorade powder gives you about 230 calories. It's not a ton, but it's enough to signal your brain that it's time to start winding down and recovering from the effort. So
Mhm.
that's what that would look like. And then usually with an evening workout, if you have that post ride shake, it's really satiating. Um, so you might not need that much for dinner in terms of
Mhm.
appetite, because working out at a high intensity and then having that shake after the workout, you might not need a whole lot, but it's listen to your body and figure out what it needs. On a day like
Mhm.
this, I would probably do like a really hearty salad. So lots of greens and veggies, good mix of grains, some proteins in there. But again, what's going to taste good? Like what's going to taste good? What's going to sit well with you when you're trying to fall asleep? Do you guys have any favorite go-tos for after an evening workout?
Yeah, because this is my schedule. So I train in the evenings. And what I've found is that if I eat a big meal after that, like my family will probably have something else for dinner, but I'll have something very different because of the fact that I've fueled the work leading up to it. And then throughout the workout, I've zero summed that whole game, right? In the sense that it's taken care of at the end of my workout. I'm not in any sort of a deficit. So I have one of two things. If it's an easy workout, I usually just have a recovery drink and I feel fine the next morning. But if it's something other than that, then I'll usually have the recovery drink and then I'll have something like so it's usually like kale and cabbage salad that I'll put together, and it's pretty straightforward, and it'll have some protein in there, just a bit of something, but it's a pretty light salad. And then the same thing that I'll do with if I don't have salad, I'll mix together, something pretty small, but I'm usually just not that hungry, and then I sleep really well if I do that workout and I've fueled everything up to that, so I'm not in a deficit. Have that recovery drink. It's awesome. It makes me sleep great. So
I eat a ton. So I do I have, I'm lucky enough. So if you have an admin, she has all the bottles made for me. So I have all my drinks, I have my recovery drinks, and then I'll do the protein. I do protein separate, and then I do tart cherry juice because I like the taste of that. And it makes me drink a little more to make sure that I'm fully hydrated. And then mixing those together I don't like that taste. So do that. And then like, for example, last night, so I rode, drank that stuff, lifted weights, came home, and I did a TikTok sandwich that I saw. It was whole wheat bread, pesto on one side, avocado on the other side, turkey, lettuce, and tomato toasted. And then I had a baked potato, a big salad, a big bowl of fruit with like berries in it, and then like Annie's soup, a can of
the
that.
man is a world
And then
tour eater. Everybody.
sometimes I was actually hungry because I was in bed and I go, hey, you know what sounds good is Hawaiian pizza, and I never want Hawaiian pizza. And then I said my pillow looked like a sushi roll after I hit it together. And I was like, oh, I'm probably hungry, but I was too lazy to eat anything else. If I was going to have a bigger ride today is just 45 minutes West Venditti or something, whatever. Very easy ride today. I would have done, actually, no, I had a bowl of granola. So I had From the Fields granola. I had that too. Yeah, and that helps. And I'm pretty, for someone who's almost 40, I'm fairly lean. People are, you can still lose body fat fueling your workouts and eating. You just need a slight caloric deficit during the day and you can lean out, which is, I'm looking in the chat too. People equate that you have to have no carbohydrate during your ride in order to lose body fat, but that is not the case at all. And that's
probably the worst way to go about it, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you can take in more carbohydrate, you can do more work. And if you can do more work, then your body is changing itself and it ends up, it's just, it's burning more calories. That's
Right.
honestly, even if like the deficit doesn't have to be as much of a focal point. Instead, if you just focus on fueling the work, you'll often find that over time, body composition goes to where it needs to be.
Right. Your body is trying to help. Yeah.
When I was way back when TrainerRoad started and I took time off and then I had like the 189 FTP, I look at my workouts and it would be like, I want to say 400 or 500 calories in an hour. And I remember looking at Chad's, and Chad in 60 minutes would burn 1,000 calories. And I was just like, my goodness, can I imagine the day when I would burn 1,000 calories an hour, how much I would eat? And that day has come now. But it's like, just to say, focusing on, we're going to talk about this later too, focusing on raising that FTP, 500 more calories an hour that I'm burning, which is amazing. Where I think if probably I would have done that all fasted or fat adapted, I don't think I would have ended up in the same place. Probably could go, actually, no, I probably could still go longer now. I can go, like at Leadville, I went 200 and something watts for 9 hours at elevation. That used to be, 220 used to be my VO2 max power, right?
Yeah.
That's the crazy part about it.
Yeah, exactly. When you fuel the work, what's happening is when you give your body the fuel, your body's trying to help. And what you're doing is you're making requests of your body. Every time you ride your bike, you're like, okay, body, this is the thing that I would like to be able to do better. And then you give your body what it needs to do the thing that you're asking it to do. And your body, which is really smart, by the way, is going to figure out the most optimized, most efficient way of being able to accomplish that. That's what our bodies are designed to do. They figure out the most efficient, most optimal way of accomplishing something, and they get it done. It's trust your body, give it what it needs. It's trying to help you. And then when the quality of your work goes up, the quality of that training stress goes up, the quality of your adaptations will increase. And those adaptations, like mitochondrial density, vascularization, these are all things that are going to serve to, build muscle. These are all things that are going to serve to naturally over time change your body composition anyway. And a lot of us have this, we've talked about this before, this idea that in order to be good at cycling, my body needs to look a certain way. And we're looking outside ourselves at external examples of what we think our body should look like. And it doesn't work like that. Your body is very, very, very individual. And so what your optimal cycling body is going to look like may not look like what you see on the cover of Outside magazine. It's okay. You can still be really, really good at riding your bike. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on how amazing your body is that it can actually do these things in the first place, and let alone adapt to it, get better at it, and improve to the point where 220 VO2 max power was your VO2 max power, whereas now you can just sit there forever. I mean, that's amazing that our bodies can do that. So let's focus on that. Fuel your body, give it what it needs, and it will blow your mind. It's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Changes things.
It does. Okay. So before we get too far in the weeds here, let's go. Last example 3, weekend long ride. So we'll assume this will be about 4 hours endurance. Again, I'm trying to make the math pretty simple, but this is fairly, about 500 calories an hour is probably a good estimate. So on the weekend with a more flexible schedule, we can assume that you have the flexibility to eat 3 hours before the ride. So let's go ahead and do that. At 4 hours, a 4-hour ride at 500 calories per hour, you're going to burn about 2,000 calories. So again, we want that pre-ride meal 3 hours before plus what you eat during the ride to equal about what you're burning, which means between your pre-ride meal and what you eat on the bike, you want to try to hit 2,000 calories. This is not always easy to do. And what I'm going to suggest here in the example might seem completely unattainable, and that's okay. Again, you don't have to just go out and do this today. This is something that you can work up to. Okay. So pre-ride breakfast, you want to hit it pretty good on this one because this is going to be a big day. So if you have 2 servings of old-fashioned oats, that's about 380 calories. If you add to that 4 tablespoons of maple syrup, that gives you an extra 200 calories. So if you really want to pack the calories in on this meal, like maple syrup's a really good way to sneak that in. And that's still only about 580 calories. So then let's add in a little bit of toast with jam and cream cheese. That's about 300 calories. So pre-ride breakfast is roughly 880 calories. I trained myself to a point where I could easily eat 1,000-calorie breakfast ahead of a big ride. And that is definitely something that you can work up to. It's not totally necessary, but again, it doesn't have to be exactly right or precise or accurate. You can just try to get close to it. And then during the ride, I would suggest you start with 2 bottles of mix, because we'll just assume that you're not going to be able to get mix mid-ride. So start with 2 bottles of mix, 80 calories each. That's about 120 calories. You'd probably want to take in 6 to 8 bottles on a ride like this. So then we'll add 4 to 6 bottles of water, 0 calories, assuming that you'll be able to refill somewhere at a water stop. And then 4 packages of clip blocks. So that's about 800 calories or kilocalories, however you want to say it. And then that's looking at, again, about 3 blocks every 15 minutes, or as the terrain allows, right? So some places are a lot easier to reach in your pocket and grab a bite, others not so much, but you want to just aim for consistent intake as much as possible. So doing that math, that brings us to about 920 calories during the ride, plus 880 calories for breakfast. That gets you to about 1,800 calories, which is pretty close to 2,000. So it's pretty good. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect, but we're trying to make sure that we're fueling enough to meet what we're burning on that ride. And then again, immediately after the ride, recovery shake, 230 calories, 1 scoop of whey, 2 scoops of Gatorade powder, easy peasy. And then lunch and dinner. Probably going to end up with a late lunch on a weekend long ride day like that, but again, solid square meals with an eye toward the next day's ride. So if you're planning another big long ride the next day, you're probably going to want to have some nice carbohydrate rich meals. I don't know about you guys, but I love a burrito on the weekend. It's usually my
Every day.
favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Do you guys have favorite post-ride meals for those long weekend rides?
Oh, burritos,
Yeah.
100%. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's always like it. I even did that this weekend after a 4-hour ride. Yeah, that's my favorite one.
I don't
have
really
a-
do post ride because I don't typically do 2 days in a row. So I'm all about the preload. So it's
Mhm.
about all those indulgences prior to the ride. And I'm not real good at eating breakfast either. So I need to get everything kind of in the bank, so to speak, the night before. So that's when the ice cream and the pizza and the beer all fold into this wonderful pre-rice or pre-ride, pre-race meal.
I have 3 things to bring up on this. Okay. First, a lot of times when people do this too, Amber, these long rides, you'll miss lunch. So you got to factor that in, right? You'll ride
Yeah.
right through lunch, and then you're like, but you might only eat dinner then and realize, and some people like Chad, they'll skip breakfast too. And you can get in this really big hole where recovery takes a lot longer to come back
And
from.
you'll note a lot of the time you won't notice that after the workout, right? Or after the ride, right? And it's like
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days later. That's when you're still feeling that hole.
Yeah. You like don't get hungry until the next day, which
Yeah.
is tough. 2, Cape Epic, this is going to be gigantic. And when I did Pikes Peak Apex, that stage race, I tested something. And so what I did is I wanted to see what the difference is between sleeping and eating for performance before stage race days. Because getting up 3 hours before a 7 a.m. start or 8 a.m. start, like you take away some sleep. Usually it's hard for me to go to bed at like 7 or 6 p.m. And so what I tried there's 4 days. First day was easy because it was a midday, but the next 2 days, I had extra sleep and I was trying to do the math. I was like, I could get 6 hours extra sleep during the stage race by trying to eat a whole bunch just right before and not doing the 3 hours. And so that's what I did is I tried to do, I did like 2 gels, so 200 calories right before, and then I banged 500 carbs an hour during the race. And I performed okay. On the last day, when I should be the most tired, I got up early and I did a 1,000-calorie breakfast of just like Panda Puff and Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I did max power that day. For like the amount of time, I think I did 20 or 30 watts higher than previous days for that same time on the last day of a stage race. So that just shows me I can do it, but I do a lot better with it. And for Cape Epic, because our starts are early, I think like the pros start at 7 and then it's spaced after that. That's like a 4 a.m. wake up call, or 4 a.m. and then immediately eat, which is going to be tiring. I need to be able to shut my brain off and go to sleep early because I want both. I want the 9 hours of sleep or 9.5 or even 10 and the food. But I think that was pretty interesting. Lastly, the third thing, Chad and I and Casey, and maybe anyone else in Reno wants to go, we're going to do a longer gravel ride on Sunday, I believe if Chad's still in, between 70 and 80 miles with a 7 a.m. meet, 7:30 roll. I'm wondering, Chad, with your strategy, and I know you want to eat more carbs for Cape Epic, which every day I'm like, is this going to happen? But it'll happen some year. Chad, what is your strategy? Like, what are you going to eat on Sunday's ride? And like, do you have a goal or a plan do you have a limit that you want to reach or a high point for carbs? What is your plan?
Yeah, I'm trying to tolerate somewhere between 60 and 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour right now. So that's what I've nudged it up to. I mean, I used to get by on scant calories. It was 30, 40 per hour, but I was doing shorter rides too. So I can get away with that and then just kind of pay the prices later. So, 60, which is not a high bar, certainly not for people like Nate and even Jonathan and Amber for that matter. But it's where I'm at right now. So that's going to be, and this is going to be a multi-hour ride. So I'll get to see, can I do this? Because right now I've done it for 3 hours in a row. Now I got to see, can I do it for 4, 5, 6, however long this ride takes. So that's the one little advance in my progression that I'm throwing at myself this weekend.
This will take 5 to 6 hours. So 60 grams of carbs, not calories per hour, 60 grams of carbs per hour. I think that's what you meant, right?
Oh, did I say calories? I meant grams.
You said calories once and grams once. Is that going to be, how are you going to, like, what kind of liquid, what products? I'm just curious.
SIS gels, those tap it. Is that what it is, Jonathan?
Oh yeah, I think
The
so.
maple syrup?
the maple syrup gels, and I've also got the maple
Untapped.
syrup untapped.
Untapped is one.
Untapped.
This is another company. A podcast listener sent it to us. Forgive
Yeah,
me
I
for not
absolutely
remembering
love
the
them.
name.
They
Please
make
scream
they
it
make
at
gels,
us
and they
right
also
now.
make waffles. Yeah,
Mhm.
they make waffles too, but the waffles are. I don't know. You guys need to fix those. I can't eat them. They're super, super messy. So it almost, most of it goes onto the trail and not in my mouth. So I'm going to have to stick to the gels and figure out a different solid food to supplement. I might just make some pancakes. Cold pancakes have done the trick for me many times. A little harder to quantify though. I do like packaged foods in that they tell you exactly how many calories and what the composition of those calories is.
Mhm.
Endurance
One
Tap.
thing,
That's the brand.
That's
Okay.
it. That's
Sorry.
the one.
one of the things I forgot to include on this, which is, I'm sorry, this is like kind of like this is sacrilegious. Um, Mid-Ride Bakery Stop.
Oh,
There
yes.
you go. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
I mean,
I love
and
mid-ride
I know,
stops.
yeah, it's the best, especially for those long weekend rides. So that's another great place that you can add into that carbohydrate total and make sure that you're meeting what you're burning. But and even now, I think a lot of bakeries are offering, takeout, or you can just grab it, eat it outside on the pavement or something like that. But yeah, Mid-Ride Bakery Stop.
Well, I just did a ride from Reno to Squaw Valley last weekend, and we stopped at Coffee Bar in Truckee, which is excellent. And I had a giant cinnamon roll, and then everyone was like, "Wow, you're eating that cinnamon roll?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then I ate another giant cinnamon roll because I was hungry, and it is amazing, and I don't know, that was a 4,000 calorie day. Like I can eat 2 cinnamon rolls and just be fine.
Well, and then
Yeah,
too, the
yeah.
one thing that's helped quite a lot is the slower carbohydrate in the UCAN. So the UCAN drink mix, that's a tough one because I like water in my hydration pack, water with maybe some pH 500, 1000, whatever. So a little bit of sodium in it. But I don't like to put food in my hydration pack just because I know I'm going to burn out on that at some point. So I have to pack that bottle form, which for a longer ride is going to introduce a new challenge. I don't think I want to put 2 bottles in 2 pockets in addition to a hydration pack. And I don't know. I got some figuring to do.
Yeah, and then at Cape Epic, what's even harder is, there's aid stations, and I believe there's 1 bottle drop per day for us. But everything else you got to get from aid stations, and you got to figure out. We're all used to our foods. There's going to be different foods. Triathletes are very good at this, is they buy what's going to be on the course and train with that because it is different. And when you have to drink all Gatorade products, unless you have your own, like you're going to carry, I don't know, 4 liters of water with you for Ironman. It's very hard. So that's like another wrench. Chad's going to be great at his his simple as Yukon starch and his maple tapped, and then at Cape Epic he's either got to carry like 8 bottles with him per day or switch to something else, which is just the idea of that I think Amber, you're totally right. It's like training the gut. The more you eat, I feel like maybe I like beta fuel. I can do a ton, 500 calories on that, but maybe I can do 400 calories on just random food now because I'm so good at eating stuff.
Yeah, I like to joke that I trained myself to be a garbage can. I could just eat anything and it's not really going to bother me. It's an
a
underrated
useful
skill.
Yeah.
When
Totally.
I first started triathlon, I was a runner and I got injured, and I started triathlon and I read about it. This is like in 2006 or 2007, and I was like, okay, you have to eat a lot when you do it. So what I would do is I would eat a full dinner and then go run as fast as I could for 5 miles, because I was like, you got to be able to like not throw up and have a full stomach. And I got really good at that. And it was really hard at first, and I would get cramping and stuff and feel nauseous. But after a while, it was like, I can run with a full stomach. This is pretty cool.
See,
so it is
your
trainable.
body can figure it out. Isn't that awesome?
Another way to go about this that requires significantly less vomiting, I would assume for everybody listening to this, is just work your way up like Chad's doing. He's got to 60 to 80 now, and then he does a little bit more and use the products that you know you can, and eventually you'll get to the point where this absolutely will make sense. But it's the saying that I always remind myself: it would be a shame to let palate fatigue get in the way of a good performance, right? Like for me, the last thing I want to do is drink out of my hydration pack more mix. But you know what? I do it because it's what I can drink regularly. It's what I can drink easily. I don't even have to grab a bottle, and I know I'm going to drink more of it that way. So I do it. And then at the end of the race, last thing I want to touch is like anything sugary. You know what I mean? Like I'm done with it then. But but during the race, I get used to it. And man, it's taken a lot of years, but I get used to it. And then when I'm used to it, my performance is just so good. You'll become an instant, like you'll say like, man, I must just be really good at the end of races. No, it's not that you're really good at the end of the races. It's just everybody else doesn't fuel well. And that'll become apparent to you. Like you're the one
it's
feeling
pretty
well. It's crazy.
It's pretty amazing what you can condition your body to get used to. And I can't help it. Nate talks about his hard run right after dinner. And I can't help but see Michael Scott doing his 5K fun run for the cure.
Yes.
Exactly. That's a tough way to go about it. Effective perhaps, but man, that's a tough way to do it.
You put through all of, to John's point, you put yourself through so much pain, right? And like dedication, you're getting up early. And then on race day, you're like, it's kind of like, I'm tired of this taste, so I'm not going to eat anymore. And like, I can't handle this like part of it. Like, it just doesn't taste good. So like, I'm just not going to eat and like tank my performance. That's just, to me, it's like, that's the easiest part, is eating the same food all day long. Or like to be like, hey, I'm kind of full, but I'm going to eat more. Like, we are wired to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's the
train your
training
way
that's
toward
hard.
it and believe in yourself. Don't cancel out all the hard work you did with a silly taste thing, you know? So, that was awesome, Amber. Thank you for running through those scenarios. Hopefully that gave, and I feel like that was a really comprehensive look at nutrition in general and kind of our perspective on it, that it's health first and fueling the training. And those are the main priorities behind it. Nate, do you have something to add before we jump into Cameron's question?
I feel like we just did an hour-long pitch to carbohydrates, like we're sponsored by the Carbohydrates Association of America.
Yeah. Big carb. It's big carb, actually.
It's big carb, yeah.
Let's go into Cameron's question. He says, hey guys, I have a question that sort of piggybacks off of Dialed Health's question from the previous week. So that was 2 weeks ago, which, by the way, I hope everybody enjoyed that podcast with Elliot Jackson last week. Amber and I, we felt like it was so darn good. We loved it. And we were like Slack chatting our happiness thereafter. So it was
I wanted to
really
keep talking to him for the rest of the day.
I know, we need to have him back on.
Yeah.
He was great. So he says, I've been following high volume plans for the entire year and have seen the biggest FTP gains in a long time. And he says, thanks especially to some solid advice from Jonathan. Cameron reached out to me on Instagram and I gave him some advice. I'm sure that I just said that. You'll find me all on Instagram and my DMs are going to blow up, but go ahead and I'll carve out time for that this week. So you can see the Instagram right now on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. If not, it's LeeJonathan_. So okay. So he says, this winter, I'm looking to add 2 to 3 days of strength and core training to my plan. Smart man, Cameron. He says, so now for my dilemma, I've considered dropping the volume back to a mid-volume plan or even a hybrid high-volume plan where I only do the Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday workouts when I add the extra load of strength training. But I've worked hard to make those big gains this year, and I'm worried that if I decrease my volume, that I'll lose some of those gains. On the other hand, I'm also worried that if I stick with high volume and add this additional training on top of that, I'll end up overdoing it and losing gains anyway. Super valid concerns, and really smart of him to think that he just can't do it all and be fine, right? Like, this stress is stress. So he says, I currently do my weekday workouts in the afternoon and weekend workouts in the morning. Is spacing the strength training workout several hours away from time on the bike enough? He says, I find that every time I think I know what I should do, I find a reason to rethink it. So as always, thanks for your help and guidance from Cameron. It's a great question, Chad. Tons
It's a great question, man. They're exactly that. There are so many fun things to unpack. I think this question, more than any other in recent memory, I addressed every single point because they're all absolutely worthy of discussion and the research that went into some of them. So, and I'm also going to diverge just a little bit because there is a relevant topic it's a little bit of a tangent, but actually it's not. It's very much on topic. Okay. So first off, Cameron, you've achieved the gains and that's the hard part. So from this point forward, you could just go into maintenance mode, and maintenance is comparatively easy. So if you were just looking to hang on to what you are doing right now and supplement with some strength training, wouldn't be hard to do that because long-term adaptations have longer training residuals. We've talked about residuals before. We could put them in a different, you could call them quite simply residual adaptations. So once you've achieved the adaptation, how long does it reside if you neglect it? Long-term adaptations, longer training residuals, and long-term applies to the aerobic system because it trains up really slowly, but it also dissipates comparatively slowly, more slowly than, say, the anaerobic system, which trains up and declines comparatively quickly. It doesn't go away overnight, but relative to the aerobic gains, it goes away more quickly. And you could think of this in a different context or different terminology and just compare basic abilities versus more specific abilities. So aerobic fitness and strength, basic. Anaerobic strength, alactic strength, all that, or power, very specific, depending on the type of racing you're doing. Second point, less volume does not have to mean less fitness. And this ties very much into what I just said. If you look at your residuals, or if you just look at a taper, you do far less volume, you maintain the same high intensity, and you have similar fitness throughout. Admittedly, you will lose a little fitness the longer the taper is, but that fitness is probably counterbalanced with the freshness that you reap from the taper. So it all kind of balances out. It usually favors the athlete if you do it right. So this is kind of this along the same lines, but tapers are drastic reductions. We dump off a whole lot of volume and keep the intensity, whereas you're talking about going from high volume to mid volume. That's very realistic. It's very reasonable too, considering you're going to add strength training and you're hanging on to so much of what's important. Touch on that in just a second. Yeah. So back to maintenance work, you can think of it on from another perspective, in that it is similar to the taper in that you're just touching systems up. And the aerobic system doesn't take much. I mean, every 10 to 14 days, do a long ride. That will touch up. It has been shown to touch up the aerobic system. Anaerobic system, have a weekly short hard efforts. Alactic system, do a weekly round of sprints. Doesn't have to be a lot either, but the point is, and then the same goes with strength, and we'll get to strength later too, but the point is you don't have to do much. You just kind of have to touch on those systems, remind them they're still relevant, your body still needs that from them, and then move on. In your case, Cameron, excuse me, you're keeping the meat of your loading weeks, and for that I applaud you. You're prioritizing and recognizing where the most value in the structure of each week lies. So even if you stick with a high volume, you're plucking out the most useful workouts in the high volume. Shifting to a mid volume, you're plucking out the most useful workouts in that mid volume plan. So my advice, aside from all this, or in addition to it, is it's far better to play this cautiously. And you can read that as intelligently, and modify as you've proposed, because it sounds like a solid plan. But then at some point you're going to reassess, and then you'll make adjustments if necessary. I mean, it's just the gist of self-coaching.
One thing I would add to this too is that when you start strength training, right, Chad, there's an initial kind of, you need to allow for a good amount of stress to be added in. But then over time, just like you're saying with aerobic training and everything else, the maintenance doesn't take as much and it doesn't incur as much stress. So you'll likely be able to adjust things as it goes and maybe do more training on the bike once you get used to the load from strength
Very
training.
probably. Yeah. And I have a lot to suggest in that vein. So let me just say a couple things about strength work, because we covered this in pretty much in great depth last week before, whenever. First off, you're aiming your improvements at neuromuscular adaptations. So don't make these workouts metabolic. And that's an easy rut to fall into. Think of the fact that you're already addressing your energy systems, your aerobic, anaerobic, your oxidative, glycolytic. Let's probably should start shifting to those terms. They're a little more descriptive. And for clarification, if you are a CrossFitter, or you think CrossFit is going to be what you're going to use to supplement your training, that's going to be your strength training. Anytime you hear CrossFit Metcon, metabolic conditioning, it's basically a VO2 max workout. So lump those onto everything you're already doing, clinging to the intensity that you've got during the week and the longer ride that you've got on the weekend. This will run you down fast. I don't think it'll take 2 weeks before you were dragging butt.
And one thing to think about that too is it's like it is stress on your system, but it won't necessarily, I know it won't give you the same performance boost as a TrainerRoad VO2 max, a cycling VO2 max workout. So think of, I know CrossFit bills themselves as the fittest people on earth, and you think you do Fran and you're going to, it's very hard. It's separate. It's different, but it is stress you have to take into account.
Stress is the same system, but delivers very different performance benefits in the end. So that's the,
It's one way to look at it. Yes. Yep. Okay. So again, keep your strength work focused on neural adaptations. And yet another way to look at that is you can see the way that neural relates to hypertrophic gains. So the way that communication relates to the bigger muscle fiber gains is kind of similar to when we train the aerobic system and we get better mitochondrial function. Maybe not necessarily more mitochondria, no greater density, but the mitochondria work better. So in this case, The enhancements are in the function. They're not in the size of the muscle fiber or the quantity of the mitochondria. It's kind of along those lines. So you're training neuromuscular capacity. The aerobic capacity, the anaerobic capacity, leave that for the bike workouts. When you're in the gym, you're training your neuromuscular capacity. So again, function over energy system. I'm sorry, muscle function over energy system function. And yes, high force, low velocity. So heavy lifts is one way, but, and I'll expand on this, the high velocity, low force is another way. So the power training, you don't necessarily have to lift heavy loads to get a lot of benefit out of time in the gym. Which brings me to the topic that I really want to steer this at, and that's concurrent training, because that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about stacking endurance workouts or really strength workouts on top of existing endurance workouts and figuring out how to make those things play nice together, trying to reap benefits from both without sacrificing, big gains in either. So concurrent training, doing both endurance training and strength training can be beneficial, but where most endurance athletes get it wrong, Nate kind of touched on this, is when you pile the strength work on top of your endurance training. You're already doing this much in a week. You decide you want to add strength training, so I'm just going to pile it on top. Why not? It's a different system. It's different stress. I can handle it. Probably not. Berryman, Mujica, and Bosquet, 3 names that are very notable in this, basically in exercise science, but also in the science of recovery and tapering and that sort of thing, did a review just last year, 2019. And they pointed to an old study by Hickson, it's decades old. It might be 1970, it might be 1980, that showed this similar strength gains in a group of people who concurrently trained, so did both endurance and strength, versus a group who just did resistance training. Similar strength gains until weeks 6 and 7, where the wheels started to come off the wagon. This is when the stress started to add up to a point where they're thinking, I can do strength training in addition to my endurance training, and then found out, hard no, you cannot. You've only got so many resources. Then you look, flash forward a couple decades, 3 decades, whatever. Pavel Lanin in 1999 looked at elite cross-country runners and saw improvements in their 5K times. And this is at the elite level via 9 weeks of plyometric and explosive training, what I just talked about earlier, which is the high velocity, low load. Anyway, so now they're moving quickly. Plyometrics, just body weight with a little bit of explosive weight training. So these are light loads. They're moving them quickly. How'd they do it? By replacing 32% of their normal running sessions. They took a third of their running off the table and replaced it with strength training. So, and they saw good benefit even at the elite level. Then finally, a 2005 study by Shitara, Shimari, and Schwachi. I talked about Schwachi last week or the week before when we covered strength training. And all these studies are linked, by the way. They used 48 recreational athletes to show that 12 weeks of endurance before strength training, and we're talking same day concurrent training, so same day, really relevant to all of us, they improved their 4K time trial times. They improved their time to exhaustion. They improved their max aerobic speed, and they did it better than the group who did strength before endurance. They did it better than the strength only, no surprise there. But big surprise, they did it better than the endurance only group. So for all the talk and the control. So for all the talk of focus on what you want to be best at, well, here's a little bit of evidence that says you can focus on something else and it will make you better in that thing that you want to be best at, even though it seems to fly counter to its adaptations.
But isn't in this study though, they didn't add like if they add the extra hour of strength training a couple days a week, they're not adding an extra hour of cycling. That's, you know what I mean? They're not controlling volume overall. So you do cyclists, you're doing 5 hours cycling or 5 hours cycling plus 3 hours of strength training. I want to see 8 hours of cycling versus 5 hours of cycling with, 3 hours of weightlifting. That's the thing that people always say is like, well, it's, if I'm out of time, what do I do? Both. But I think I do it.
Sure.
And I think you do it. Everyone does it. Strength training is good for all.
Yes. And I assume that since we're talking about elite athletes, they're probably training a lot of hours a week. So for them to carve out just a couple, I mean, yeah. Actually that's the previous study. Got a little mixed up there. Okay. So anyway, what this all leads me to is the point of separating our endurance workouts from our strength workouts. And how do we do that in the best ways? Because as we've mentioned in the past, there are cell signaling implications. And in this case, the cell signaling and the research behind it seems to say that endurance training before strength training, doing your strength training later in the day, endurance earlier in the day, is the route to success. One of the reasons, AMPK we've talked about before. Let's just, ditch the acronym and talk about endurance signaling. So the signals that spur endurance adaptation. This elevation is a matter of a few hours. So you do an endurance workout, and the elevation in the signaling that perpetuates endurance adaptation hangs on for a few hours there. Whereas mTOR, which is what signals strength signaling, can last for up to a matter of days. It definitely lasts for many more hours than endurance signaling. So ideally, your scheduling maximizes the signaling for each effect. You don't want to tramp on one doing the other. So again, and in addition to this, AMPK, so the endurance signaler, inhibits mTOR. And this is that interference effect we've talked about many times. Endurance signaling actually steps all over strength signaling. So if strength is done first, the sooner you perform your endurance training relative to it, the sooner you start stepping on the signals that are fostering strength adaptation. So what is the margin by which we separate these types of workouts? The research points to about 6 hours being the minimum, and a lot of them were closer to 8 hours, all the way up to 24 hours being super ideal. In fact, they noted that when you do high intensity interval training and you separate your strength training by 24 hours, they didn't see an interference effect at all, at least in AST study. So this might be a single argument for doing your strength workouts on rest days. And I know
Which is
that
complex though, right?
It is. So, I mean, you aren't resting on that day, but if you're lifting heavy, you're keeping it short, there's also a neuromuscular fatigue component that comes into it that I'll touch about. So it's tricky stuff.
Chad, could I add maybe like a contextual recommendation here then? If this is a situation where you have a rest day coming up and you do your endurance workout early on Monday and Tuesday's your rest day, then maybe doing the strength training late on Monday to give yourself like, the most leeway in some.
No, that's exactly what I've been personally experimenting with, but doing sprint workouts in the morning on the bike. So high intensity interval training, and then saving my strength training for later on. So we're talking the difference between 5 a.m. and 4 p.m. So it's a pretty good window. We're talking like a 12-hour margin there. So far, so good. Yeah, I'm a little off track because I've got a little sick, but it seems to be bearing out. We'll see.
Cool.
And then, so as far as, that covers the cell signaling part. What about nutrition? Nutrition kind of backs this up too. It again abides the whole idea that endurance should precede strength work. So strength training requires nutrition to perpetuate its adaptations. It's simply how it works. So that mTOR is responsible for muscle synthesis, and it's impaired by nutrient deficiency. If you don't give yourself the necessary building blocks, how is your body supposed to build anything? There's a strong argument for carbohydrate prior to strength training. And a lot of that ties to motivation, or just the fact that you feel satiated, that you're not distracted by hunger, et cetera. So maybe it's all in the mind, doesn't matter. There's a benefit. Protein and carbohydrate post. Amber drove that into the ground. That recovery drink with a bit of protein in it is a great, no, it's necessary. If you're trying to foster adaptation, it's necessary. And then protein intermittently throughout the rest of the day. If you're looking for strength gains, especially if you're looking for hypertrophy and bigger muscle fibers, you got to keep on dosing it with protein. No more protein necessarily than usual, just protein intermittently in quantities that your body can use it more effectively. But the point here is that you can't starve muscle synthesis. You have to feed it. Endurance work, however, is a gate that actually swings both ways. Some of the adaptations need to be nourished, and the more glycolytic in nature that your workouts are, the more carbohydrate that's going to be required. Protein intake can actually mitigate protein degradation. And a note on that, whenever we talk about doing a long ride and needing a little bit of protein because I feel like I'm going to burn muscle fiber because I've heard that we can resort to protein as a fuel source. This is all true, but the protein doesn't necessarily come from muscle fiber. There are all sorts of proteins in the body, and you can metabolize them in the absence of, carbohydrate, or, if you're working too hard to metabolize fat. But point is, those proteins they're assigned other tasks. They're not meant as a fuel source. So when we use them as a fuel source, well, we're kind of going down the wrong path. So ideally, a little bit of protein along the way can help you mitigate that degradation. So back to the swinging gate that I was just talking about, some of the adaptations actually take place in the absence of nourishment. And this is why we talk about fasted rides and postponing meals to after a ride for a couple hours, et cetera. Because AMPK, or the endurance expression, relies on low energy availability. So that's the whole fasted ride part of it. But it also responds to declining energy stores. So over the course of the ride, as we burn energy, that in and of itself is signaling. So this energy supply that was this high is now this high, is now this high. As it depletes, more signaling is taking place. So it doesn't just happen post or fasted, it also happens during as well. which is another challenge to heap onto the pile. And then finally, some finer but important points, just a couple. Hypertrophy, so bigger muscles, VO2 max, body fat percentage, they don't care about this sequence. Whether you do strength work first or endurance work first, doesn't matter to those aspects of performance or physiologic adaptation. And then strength training can decrease your time to exhaustion. And honestly, anytime I see time to exhaustion, I just chalk that up to motivation. So anything that hampers your motivation, and in this case can be strength training, your time to exhaustion, your motivation suffers for up to 24 hours. And, keep this in mind when you've got maybe a big, important, possibly or potentially very productive workout the next day. Maybe don't do your strength training in the afternoon if you've got an early morning, important endurance workout.
That's what group workouts is all about there. Time to exhaustion extension, right?
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. When you have other people training with you, it totally changes things. So Chad, I guess I'm going to ask some just very straightforward questions on this. Let's say I'm following a training plan where I train 6 days a week. So I'm doing high volume training, right? When would you fit in your strength training?
Yeah, that's tough. On the one hand, I want to say, do it on your high intensity interval training days. If you have the luxury of being able to flip flop your workouts as you see fit, do your interval training in the morning and save your strength training for the afternoon, just like I described. And ideally the next day is one of those lower intensity rides. So you get, and there, I almost don't want to bring this up because I don't want to botch it, but there is some doing your strength training and then doing light intensity the next day doesn't stamp on the signals like following it with high intensity training.
Got it. So this is, if you're following a high volume plan, this is like a really good way of, when you look at it, usually have 1 to 2 days in a row of more difficult workouts, whether that's like a sweet spot workout or a VO2 workout, followed by a relatively easy workout, which that's going to be like a Z2 ride. So that's like a great time is to do that workout the evening before that Z2 ride that you have scheduled the next day.
And then the option also is to take those lower intensity rides off the table, and that's where you would substitute in. But again, that's a tricky balance because you're doing hard stuff. And yeah, it's tapping different energy systems and it's different stresses and it's different muscles in the body. But all of that does take a cumulative toll on the system as a unit.
So I have a few questions and a few thoughts, and then I'll tell you what I do too. One thought I have on this is, Chad, did you see any studies where they actually measured the impact of this? Because sometimes they look at, okay, the AMPK versus mTOR, but then do they take two groups, put weight training in different areas, and then see actually how much the performance declined over many weeks?
Yeah, I mean, they do randomize it in crossover. So there were crossover workouts. As far as the 3 that I referenced, I didn't look. I can't say for sure. I didn't look deeply into either of those.
Those 3 were just seeing if it improved it in general. But I want to know the timing, because this is I'm so curious about the mTOR versus AMPK, because if you guys know me, I like to maximize everything.
No, not you. No.
But I want to know, are we talking about 2 watts or are we talking about 30 watts, right? Because there's a huge difference between those two.
Yeah. So in that case, dive into that 2019 review, that Berryman, Mujica, and Bosquet that's linked, because they link to almost every study that's relevant. It's a very thorough review, but it's all very current and succinct. So if there's any one thing you want to tease out, they probably got a study that addresses that single thing.
To your point, Nate, and hopefully this can illustrate something that can help people. Otherwise, many times you'll see a study and it'll be like, I don't know, fat ingestion harms performance, but it might be a watt, right? Or like a fraction of a watt, or just insert whatever thing. But when you read the headline, it just says it harms performance. So in our minds, many times we misunderstand that. We might think, oh, this is going to make training impossible, when really it's probably one of the things we don't have to worry about quite as much. Because antioxidants is a really good example for that. There are headlines that say antioxidants in recovery completely, it stops inflammation so that you can't actually adapt from your training and absorb your training. But when you look at that, there's a lot more nuance in that. And the fact is that if you take antioxidants, it's not like it removes inflammation entirely from your body and you miss the whole boat. So why don't people just quantify every study in terms of how many watts I'm going to lose or gain? They just need to do that for me.
So another thing, I have no Science backs up. But I know I do this way, Keegan and Sophia, but we do our workouts and then immediately after go into strength training. And all three of us have been able to increase our performance, and two of them at an extremely high world-class level. So it doesn't mean they couldn't be better by separating it, but I just want I hear what Chad's saying, and I think, oh my God, if I do any weight training after I work out, I am going to not get, I'm suddenly going to become like a strength person and not a endurance person.
That's a super fair observation. And then I actually did that for quite some time and I got good results from it. But we're talking about getting as close to optimization as we can with two competing types of modes of exercise.
Yeah. So my next point is, let's say you can't, like a lot of your schedule doesn't allow you to do double day. So my question would be, is it better to do your strength training? I think we all agree if you're going to put them close together, do the strength training after cycling for cyclists, because we want to maximize the performance in that workout. And everyone's shaking their head yes on this. Is it better to do strength training afterwards or to do no strength training at all to be a faster cyclist? And I think for better human, in general, yes, it is. And I believe too, it's probably better to be a bit faster cyclist too if you don't overdo it. Although, as Chad's point, there is even a better way to do it to separate it out.
And it's also
but
probably,
if we're not looking to optimize both of these responses though, and you do your your interval training and then you follow it with your strength workout, which is like I said, I did that for a long time. There was still some benefit conveyed. I wasn't doing as well as I could do with each of those if I separated them a bit or did them on different days, but there's still benefit, and that is an important point to not miss. You do still benefit both on the strength end and the endurance end by doing both these workouts, even if you lump them back to back like that.
also unseen benefit too, right, Chad? In the sense that it's not like you didn't, you may not have broken yourself and you hit the ground because you were strength training, and maybe you didn't chalk it up to that, or you're just able to ride your bike more powerfully, more effectively, handle your bike, that sort of stuff. And you don't necessarily say, oh, that's entirely because of strength training. And many times we just don't see those benefits quite so clear, cut and dry. And one thing I want to add to this is it is somewhat discipline dependent as well. I still think that Grand Tour cyclists shouldn't be worried about carrying a heavy bag and shouldn't have people around them to be able to carry that, right? Like, when we see riders just falling over and then fracturing hips and fracturing, collarbones instantly as soon as they hit the ground, that's worrisome for sure. And for most of us average folks that aren't paid to be a power to weight ratio, which is basically what a Grand Tour GC contender is, since we're not paid to do that, it's much more beneficial for us, all of us, to incorporate strength training at some level for this. Like and you may not notice the difference, and that's how it should be, because if you notice the difference, then hopefully you weren't, you're probably really far down and you notice, wow, I really need to strength train because I have weak bones or I'm very incapable of doing it. So, consider your discipline for sure. If you're just, climbing and that's it, and you're really obsessed with that and that's your goal, I still think you could benefit from strength training. You're probably going to be a better athlete. But if you're certainly somebody that's doing cross country, cyclocross, anything, crit racing, even where it's much more, a physical endeavor, it just pays off so much.
Mm-hmm. And then let me just finish by saying the last thing I want to do is discourage people from adding strength training to the routine just because they can't schedule it perfectly. If you can find a way to get it in there, get it in there. Don't concern yourself with when it happens. Over the longer term, start looking at how your performance is being affected for sure, but don't skip it because you can't make it work perfectly.
Right. And I want to just add real quick about the World Tour, like even the World Tour riders. This is really, really good for World Tour riders. Jonathan, you brought up bone density as a major issue. The basis for all performance is health. If you don't have your health, you can't perform. And so one of the most important factors in being consistent and performing well at a high level consistently is not getting sick at inopportune times and not getting injured at inopportune times, or just not getting sick or not getting injured. And strength work is a huge part of that. So always remember, when we talk about performance, the implied basis of that is general health, which you can't have top level performance unless you have health. And that goes for everybody, whether you're an amateur or you're a World Tour cyclist.
Yeah. You look at Nino, Kate Courtney, Matthew Vanderpool. They all are like, I haven't seen Matthew's strength training stuff, but he looks like he does, right? He's got a pretty big upper body, and he is faster than everyone listening, right? And Nino and Kate is faster than probably everyone listening too. And I mean, they are. And they do lots of strength training, and it's very important to their performance. So I want to share how
one quick thing, Nate. Sorry on that, but get well soon to podcast guest Kate Courtney after her crash at World Championships and with a concussion. So get well soon to her. Sorry, Nate, I interrupted. But
yeah, so I kind of wish I would have started a strength training company. I have a big love for lifting weights and for cycling, and I've fought these two for many, many years about how to balance them. And I think I've had a better balance lately, and I want to share with how I do them. I put this on Instagram too. I do my strength training immediately after my hard days and only before either an easy day or a rest day. So during sweet spot based high volume, I had a 4-day block, and I would do no strength training in that 4-day block until the last day. And then I would do it, and I would have a day off. And then I would do it again. I think I would take Saturday off. Then I would do it on Sunday and take Monday off. Right now I'm in a build phase, and I've adjusted my week so it's pretty much every other day is a hard day. So I do a hard day, I lift weights immediately after because of my schedule, and then in the morning, then the next day I do an easy ride. And for me, that has helped. But the other thing that is so huge is, I lifted weights in college, and you try to put in your gym, your bodybuilder, whatever kind of routine that you read about, and you try to insert it into cycling. And I believe that for me, it is too much. And I like the idea of like leaving reps in the tank. So maybe when I was just focused on strength training, I would go to failure or maybe one before failure. And I would do a whole bunch of sets, and I do drop sets and stuff like that. Now what I'm doing 2 sets, full body, doing a lot of different exercises inside of it, not too many. And I will, for deadlifts, I might leave 5 in the tank thinking, hey, if I had to do 5 more, I could, and not going to the limit, because if you go to the limit, it's hard. And then the other thing that I've realized is the really heavy days where I go like doubles or triples or even singles. That means you really go all out and try to do it really hard. That messes me up neuromuscularly. I get such central fatigue and brain fatigue. My legs aren't even tired, but like I'm in a fog. And if I do anything really low rep like that, it totally makes me fall off. Like when I looked back when I fell off, when I was nailing workouts back in like May, I was nailing weight training too, and I was doing really heavy bench press, at least for me. And I did more than I've ever done before, and I fell off the wagon like right after that. So both of it is just doing a little bit less. But if you're consistent, you can still, like, us cyclists aren't as you can gain a lot. You can have a lot to gain and still be pretty strong.
We need Pete on here to tell us to do less right now. That's a famous Pete quote, one that he brings in pretty regularly, and applicable for Nate the maximalist, right? That's our tendency though. It's like to just do more. Like we're doing it fine, so we can just do more.
This is what Amber says too. The common thing in my brain, I say, I am not completely destroyed today, therefore I did not do enough. And the more that I like, hey, I could do an extra interval. Chad says this all the time. Yeah, I could have done an extra interval. I could have done like 3 more, 5 more sets here and done that. That is the spot where if I can live in that zone, that 8 out of 10, boy, do I get faster. Right?
Because you can be more consistent.
Yes. And I actually recover between rides.
Yeah.
So that's how I'm more consistent, because I recover between the hard workouts, and I get this progressive step up where I get harder and harder workouts, where when I smash myself, I last, and then it's like, I just fall off.
It's so easy to overstress the system. It's so easy to overshoot what you can effectively recover from in that narrow window of recovery that you've got before you have to do it all again.
Yep.
Absolutely. Let's move into some questions on asthma. So we've gotten questions over time on asthma, and I think that it's so I think it's an important thing to cover, but we're going to do it with just basically, instead of a listener's question, we're going to do it with just a few basic questions that we've outlined that represent, in many cases, the listener questions that we've gotten over the years. Whether it's because it seems like every top performer has asthma, so you wonder if it's like, a mark of a pro or something, or why doesn't it affect athletes, and tons of stuff. So Chad, where do you want to start with this one, and then we'll just support and help go through there.
Okay. I think we had what, 1, 2, 3 general questions or 4?
Yeah,
There's 4.
absolutely.
So we'll
Yeah.
just you can read the questions when we get to them, so it can be a little bit of interplay. I wasn't quite ready to go again so soon, but
Sorry,
we
Chad.
are.
Go, Chad,
You're,
go.
you're, you're like Michael Jordan. We can't put you on the bench, buddy. Sorry.
You got this.
All right. So first off, let's talk about what asthma is, because you say it and everyone thinks they know what it is, but do they actually know what it is? I've seen it described in a number of different ways. One is that it's a controllable but uncurable disease, and which makes sense, but also doesn't stack up in that you can have juvenile asthma and it doesn't necessarily progress into adult asthma. It's an immune system sensitivity causing airway constriction and spasm. That seems to be the key term. The National Institutes of Health define it as such. Chronic lung disease characterized by episodes of airway narrowing and obstruction. Again, there's the term. That's really what we're talking about here. Causing wheezing, coughing, chest tightness, shortness of breath. You might see all that lumped together under the term dyspnea. It's basically just labored breathing. So those are how the symptoms manifest. The first question, Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah. I'll go for it. He says, what effect does asthma have on performance? Because this is a very valid question. Why does
Absolutely.
everybody seem to be fast but also have asthma?
For sure. So it turns out very little. And this is evidenced all the way up to the highest levels, Olympic, world level competition. So for everything I'm going to share from this point forward, I culled this all from about 5 different resources. I won't burden you with all the details on them. Suffice it to say, one was a systematic review and analysis on airway hyperreactivity. One was a review of 45 studies that looked at the effects of endurance training on respiratory health. One was an overview of exercise and asthma, how the two work together. And then asthma as a consequence of endurance sports was a question that one of them asked. Is asthma because of endurance sports? And then the final one was bronchial hyperresponsiveness and physical activity. So we're going to link those 2 things together. So let me start by saying that roughly 90%, according to these resources, of asthma sufferers suffer from what's termed exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. This is the more favorable term, or I think it is the term now, to replace exercise-induced asthma, because that term implied the exercise cause asthma, and that was something that the experts wanted to dispel. So exercise-induced, it's pretty straightforward. It happens because of exercise bronchoconstriction. So when you look at the path of air into the lungs and back out, all the way down at the end of it, you've got bronchioles. These are the narrowest airway tubes. And these are the ones that fuse into the alveoli, which is where the gas exchange takes place. Oxygen, carbon dioxide exchange with one another. So that's where gas exchange takes place. So if the breathing airways leading up to that constrict, obviously that gas exchange is going to be impeded. What's important here is that you can experience exercise-induced bronchoconstriction without being asthmatic. So if you're in the boat where you think I probably got asthma, well, not necessarily. There are a lot of things that can cause this EIB without actually meaning that you have asthma. So this exercise-induced bronchoconstriction is an airflow obstruction that follows an exercise challenge. So you can tie it directly to its cause. It's pretty easy to see. There's an airway narrowing, which causes increased airway resistance. And this is during or after exercise. And a lot of the time, maybe all the time, perhaps, this is due to a drying out of the airways. And this causes something called a hyperosmolar environment, which is basically just higher blood concentration. There's less water plasma, you've dehydrated your blood, dehydrated you. And this leads to what's termed a mast cell mediator release, which is really just a fancy term for allergic response. Beauty of this is it's very manageable. If you know this is something that affects you, hit the inhaler before you do your workout. So somewhat contrary to the whole idea of performance limitation is that endurance exercise has demonstrated positive impacts on asthma. So it's demonstrated improved capacity even in the face of asthma, reduced asthma symptoms, and increased quality of living, which was a measure that a lot of these studies leaned on, a subjective one. Endurance training is also shown to reduce low-grade systemic inflammation, and therefore it creates the potential to reduce localized inflammation. So if we reduce inflammation across the body, well, the lungs are part of the body, they get less inflamed also, so asthma severity declines a bit. Studies have also demonstrated that endurance training can reduce this bronchial reactivity, or this airway hypersensitivity, which is basically less reactive airways thanks to endurance training. So all these notions, or all of this agrees with the notion that through proper management, even at the highest levels, all the way up at Olympic and world level, endurance athletes are not limited by their asthma. And we've all seen how this is typically treated. It's inhaled corticosteroids or beta agonists. They're common, they're simple, they're proven. It's on you to decide if they're water approved and at what dosage.
Repeat, it's on you.
Absolutely.
It's an important thing for all of us to understand here. Too many athletes getting popped unknowingly seeming. So, yeah.
Next question, Jonathan.
All right. It says, why do so many endurance athletes seem to have asthma?
Okay. So, and we fall prey to this, and there's a number of reasons. So it's common in endurance athletes due to 2, maybe 3, and I might even touch on a 4th reason. Endurance exercise damages bronchial epithelial cells. So those bronchial tubes we just talked about, lined with epithelium, we can damage those cells, and this damage elicits a mild immune response. One of the possibilities is that due to the sheer stress that's due to our high ventilation rates causes this damage. But in counter to that, it's been noted that the sputum that people, the gunk that people cough up contains cells that are often apoptotic, meaning they were scheduled for death anyway. They were basically waste. So the question then becomes, are we causing this or are we assisting this clearance? So it's kind of hard to say. A second possibility is, or a second factor is the osmolar effects, which I just mentioned above. That's the drying of the airways, the increased blood concentration. Third is thermal effects. When we bypass nasal heating, and the cold air definitely worsens this effect. We set the stage for this bronchoconstriction. So airway cooling actually results in a reflex-driven parasympathetic response. So now we're talking about the rest and digest, because the bronchioles are actually seeking to conserve heat by constricting. Effectively, they're trying to prevent cold air from entering the lungs. The solution in this case is simply to stop exercising, stop cooling the lungs through hyperventilation, return to normal breathing, and the symptoms subside. And all of this is not indicative. Yeah. All of which is not indicative of a chronic disease. So this is just an affliction in the moment. This is something we can get past. It does not mean we have asthma. Winter athletes and swimmers, be warned, here in kind of a special subset here. Obviously, the thermal effects are especially prevalent in winter sports due to that cold air. I actually experienced it this morning, and it was a bit of a wake-up call. Secondly, swimming. And Amber, I'm sure, can attest to this, because of chlorine and chlorine-based irritants can also induce this airway hyperreactivity.
So why, I guess the other question then with this is, why doesn't asthma seem to affect some endurance athletes?
Yeah, and 2 replies to that. 1, it's very easily managed in most cases. And 2, endurance training, as I just elaborated on, has been shown to improve respiratory health.
So a lot of us too, when we get, so I get this after hard efforts in particular, whether it's called track hack, race cough, whatever you call it, but that coughing that just won't go away after a race. And sometimes it takes like a whole day for me to get to the point where I stop coughing. Is that indicative of asthma in any way, Chad?
Yeah, so maybe it's attributable to a lot of things, but it is not necessarily indicative of asthma, according to, again, the research that I spent my time combing over. So all of those are possible causes, but it's important to recognize that asthma is a chronic long-term disease. It often gets lumped under the umbrella of chronic respiratory disease, whereas track hack is more likely that exercise-induced bronchoconstriction we talked about, or something else called BHR, which is bronchial hyperresponsiveness. In either case, it's a temporary respiratory occurrence. And in both cases, the bronchioles are just angry. That's it. They exhibit unfavorable responses, whether it's immune driven, parasympathetic driven, it doesn't matter. It leads to airway inflammation and breathing becomes difficult. Both of those, the EIB and the BHR, can happen without symptoms of asthma. So maybe no coughing, maybe no wheezing, maybe no dyspnea. They both seem to be considered risk factors for the development and progression of asthma, but you can actually have both and still not be asthmatic.
Good to know. So basically it's tough to know where you, like, if those things are signs. Also, training, it kind of helps, but it also could kind of put you in a vulnerable position. So, like, once again, the science isn't like directly conclusive, but it is very interesting. Amber, did you notice that with pro athletes, that there were a lot of athletes that you raced with or raced against that had asthma at the top level?
Yeah, but it never seemed to be really an issue. I actually was diagnosed I got tested because it was like, you try to figure out every little thing because you're trying to optimize everything. And just in case, I got tested, and I did get diagnosed with the mild case of asthma I used an inhaler for a little while. I really didn't feel much of a difference at all. And it just kind of felt like keeping track of the inhaler, remembering to take it, it didn't seem worth, the extra effort, because I didn't really notice much of a difference. So I was surprised at the diagnosis, because I didn't really expect, I hadn't really noticed any major symptoms. It was more like I went in to see an allergy specialist who kind of did like a full rundown, because I wanted to just make sure there wasn't anything, I wasn't overlooking anything in particular. So my case was obviously really mild though. But in my experience, I didn't see it really being a limiter for anybody.
Yeah, I wonder what
Nate,
the misdiagnosis rate is, considering it's so prevalent. It's I don't know. I just wonder. I mean, because it's pretty easy to throw something like as harmless as Ventolin at a problem and hope that cures it, because there's no real negative effects to making that prescription, I think.
Nate, are you you have an inhaler? Is that because of asthma or allergies, or what's the situation there?
I was diagnosed with asthma in college, and then I take it before like hard efforts, and I haven't always taken on every race. And it's only impacted me in 2 races in my life. One was the 5K effort at Pyramid Lake, and it's in August. And that is one 5K is really hard, and it is an allergy-induced nightmare for me with sagebrush in August. And that was like, it ended my race. And the second one was the P21 down at Land Park when I was on Reichert's wheel. And afterwards, I was like, I was getting the bronchital hyperresponsiveness kind of thing where they were angry, as Chad said. But so it's more of it's not like a performance increaser, but it's like, if I take it, I don't really know exactly, but if I take it, I don't have the straw feeling ever when I work out. And so it's preventative, but because it doesn't happen all the time, it's like, it's easy for me to say, I don't need it. I don't need it every time, but it's nice just to have it. So I have it on my desk, which is nice. And then usually before a race, I'll just do a puff or two, and hopefully it's preventative.
I'll just follow up and say, I never had that breathing through a straw situation. So again, like my diagnosis was kind of a surprise, and that wasn't ever an issue for me. Otherwise, probably I would have been more diligent about using the inhaler.
I've only had the breathing through the straw twice. Once as a young kid, and it was actually during like the PE mile run when we were kids, and then but that one happened in August, and then also once again in a crit, and this was maybe last year or the year before. Everything was fine, and then suddenly I was breathing through a straw, and both times extremely bad allergy conditions, and so they've kind of aligned. So I'd never gone through the process to be diagnosed or anything like that, or go through with it. But it's interesting just the same. So if you're listening now and you have asthma, let us know in the comments, because it'll be interesting just to see. It's not even remotely close to a study, but it'll just be interesting to see if there are a lot of people that have them. Nate,
are we done on this topic? Because I do have a study result.
We are. Is
okay,
a
great.
Personal study result?
No, this is scientific fact. So on Instagram, I asked, should Amber and Chad do Lotoja? It is a 200-mile USAC race. And if you look at the results, you can't see it, but it says 93% yes, 7% no. And I think the 7% is just Amber and Chad voted no.
I think Amber and I need to lobby, because there's a subset of folks who are sensitive to how awful that's going to be.
The people have spoken, you two. So we will plan it for, I don't know. What is it, August? What time
it's
of year
September,
is it?
But next year I won't be able to do it. But granted, I mean, y'all could do it without me.
We'll do it twice.
But yeah, there we go. But I want to do it Chad's face. The following year, I would really love to do it. So because next year during September, if the world returns to being, to be holding bike races and all that stuff, I have 2 big bike races planned for the month of September. So
I thought next year could be a very good, long year for us, where this is if there's no COVID. Ideal, we do Cape Epic, and then I think we immediately go in and do Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, and then we do Lotoja, and then maybe we all do Leadville, and that would be
that would be a long year.
That would be we'd be pretty good at that long stuff, though.
First thought going into my head is the amount of carbs we'd have to take in. It would be substantial. With all
amazing.
That. Yeah.
Chad, what about Chad? But Chad, you're going to do Flanders and Paris-Roubaix, right?
Oh,
that's like your dream.
Are you kidding me? Yeah, I would. Yeah.
If you
Oh,
can
yeah.
do those 2 races, you can do Lotoja. Like I
Those
say,
sports
those are
used to
probably
be-
harder.
Those
No,
sports
all those
used to
things
be
fold
3
in really
events.
nicely with one another. I'm into it. It's a lot for the year, but
And
It
then
sounds
we
super
upgrade to Cat
into it.
1. We do Toad and Intelligentsia Cup and what's the one? The Tulsa Tough. And then next year we do triathlon and
Yeah.
that'll be
Yeah.
fun.
yeah.
Okay, one quick question and then one quick thing to bring up. Sorry for no time for the live questions this week, but one of them, I saw somebody asking, well, what about, you're talking about strength training. What about core training? Like, like core work and everything else. We're talking about one and the same right there in the sense that strength training is strength training. Granted, if you're going to be lifting more weight and doing more work like that, that's one thing. And if you're also, your body weight work is something that's going to be relatively low intensity and not, really demanding, clearly it'll have less demand, but when they're talking about it, we're not talking about putting up weight like our one rep max. We're talking about, like Nate said, the strength training for a cyclist looks different. We actually have blog posts that you can check out. If you go to trainerroad.com/blog on different exercises for cyclists. And actually, if you go to trainerroad.com, you don't even have to be a TrainerRoad subscriber to do this. Go to trainerroad.com. We have a strength training calculator. You can go on there. And what that does is that just gives you basic strength training benchmarks for what we feel based on rider type you should be able to do. So it's kind of like a fun little fitness test, if you will. That gives you some things. And this isn't by any means, it doesn't mean that if you can't meet those, you can't be a crit racer or whatever it is. It's just things that we've put down because we feel like they're good benchmarks. And if you do that, it's probably going to give you a good foundation of health, which, as Amber said, is the basis of performance. And it shows how they vary depending on the different racing you do. So go to trainerroad.com and check that out. Thanks for joining us, everybody, this week. Awesome podcast, like high quality, high density stuff. Next week, we are going to have, I think it's just going to be myself, Amber, and Alex Wild on the podcast because Nate will be out and I think Chad will be out as well. So that'll be a fun episode. Join us for that. That'll be at the normal time, Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific. Nice teeth, Nate. These are the things. This is what you're missing on YouTube. You just miss Nate's teeth if you don't watch.
I know
on
sometimes Amber just like smiles and laughs looking at the screen, and I don't. That's what I was like. What are you doing? I don't know. What are you laughing at, Amber?
She's throwing
Like
you
she
off.
mutes
That's
herself and she laughs, like in the middle of something that's not funny. What's going on there?
Maybe she's just doing it to get a reaction out of you.
Amber, can you tell us?
I don't know which moment you were talking about now, so I'm
Okay,
not.
well,
really
it's
sure.
recorded, so someone can pick it out and like timestamp it on YouTube.
I find a lot of joy in small things in life.
Amber's so good at like passive aggressive poking like that. It's fantastic. Okay, so if you want to submit questions, go to trainerroad.com/podcast and you can go there and submit those. We'll come through those and we will answer some more questions for next week. So thanks everybody for joining us and we will talk to you all soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Everybody.
See ya.